Okay, now we are moving to the next category of questions, and these are financial questions. So the first question again, it's from a mix of two startups. So I'll take their names. It is from Yash Mittal and Kumar Vaibhav Singh, and the company's name is Nicola Tech plus True CV, respectively. The question is, ki what strategies and methods should startup deploy to raise funds from investors or VCs, particularly for accessing pre-revenue funding?
I think again, because see, it's also because that's how we've come up, which is that what is your reason? Like, what is your compelling solution? First of all, is it a compelling problem? Is it a real problem? Like I said, it's not a problem of imagination, but a problem of real experience. If a lot of us start building things based on our imagination, and we assume that market has a problem or so and so problem, and we realize that in the end, after we've spent years of our own time and investor capital as well, that the problem was not really real, and then you have to pivot and do 20 things, right? And this happens many times, and I'll give you my experience when we were making these. So we used to make these hand crank chargers for portable electronics when we were in our early days, and we thought that if we can give rural population a way to survive their electronics off grid, and mobile phones were penetrating rural India like anything at that point in time, without regards for the fact that they didn't even have electricity in many villages, right? They would travel 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers to a kirana store, go and charge their battery, or they'll sometimes plug the phone directly with a lead acid battery and start to charge them. So all of that pointed to us imagining that it's a great product for rural India, that we'll give them something that they can crank mechanically and get power on their phone. A minute of crank will give them 3 4 minutes, 5 minutes of talk time, and maybe 3 4 hours of. Then we thought that somebody should be able to spend 4 5 hours, 4 5 minutes in a day to run through the entire day. But the reality was very different, right? I mean, the reality and the real experience was that people in the rural India also want to enjoy the same lifestyle as people in the urban India want to enjoy. People without electricity also don't want to spend effort to try and get electricity, right? They also want to receive it the way we receive it in urban India or whatever. And those kind of real experiences and real problems, if one can create a compelling case, I'm quite sure that that will show up, right, in terms of it being something that is genuinely needing to be solved. And secondly, when you go towards solving it, your solution can't be obvious, because if it is not yet solved, maybe the obvious solutions didn't work. So you have to build something unique, something differentiated, and the choice of the kind of market you pitch for is again very critical for investors, right? Investors don't want to go after $100 million market, right? They want to feel that there is a multi-billion-dollar market of which we are trying to maybe attack a sliver presently, but eventually we will attack the entire market. So that articulation is again another area of important understanding and discovery. But that real focus, and I have judged a few companies as a part of Sign Incubator and some of those so new Nidhi EIR and other programs. And I think that's where I feel that even idea level capital can be dispersed, but it has to have that depth and that feel of realism in what is being communicated, as well as a little bit of depth on what they want to build, right? Not very, very generic ideas, but real concrete visuals and representations that allow somebody to feel that something good and new will come out of what's being built.
We have another question from Mr. Mridang Shukla, PCCOE. At what stage should we consider, raising funds? Additionally, should startup consider raising funds? And additionally, they should aim raise based on their development stage, and like how IdeaForge successfully managed their funding. So actually, they want to ask that at what stage that startup should consider raising funds and raised based on their development stage. That is what the question is.
See, in terms of raising capital, I think my own experience was that it's entirely a matter of survival, right? First of all, if you need money to survive, you need money to survive, right? If you've left, if you've never had a job, don't have any money, and your parents are not going to foot your bill to keep you at your home, then you've got to find a way of surviving, right? Somebody's got to pay the rent, somebody's got to, buy the food and do whatever. So a lot of that need for capital arrives from the real needs of the entrepreneur and the problem they are trying to solve. If the problem that we are trying to solve desires or requires a minimum, uh, despite all the rapid prototype and everything that you would like to do in a very scrappy way, if it still requires a minimum torque for beginning investigations thoroughly in what the solution will be, then it will require that kind of money. So it is largely determined by, in my opinion, the need for that capital and the need for survival. Right, these two are very critical baselines. Uh, how much to raise is another question, if at all, because minimum is known based on survival, based on everything. If you don't need money from anybody, the later we raise capital, the more valuable the business potentially will become, because you would have created so much value upfront, right? But but if you raise value early, then it's the presumption of value that comes with a lot of backstops that somebody will give money and take a bet on. But again, everything is dependent on uh, how much you want to dilute, because every time you raise capital, you are going to dilute the equity, and dilution of equity would mean lesser ownership for you. And if you own too less before the company is very large, um, one may end up feeling like this is not, our company anymore. And that feeling is what you probably also want to judge the decision against. So I mean, it's a lot of push and pull. You every round there is an expectation of dilution. If that dilution will lead to very poor ownership in the end very quickly for the founding team, then it's probably worth considering as to when to go to actually raise. What's the right inflection point where the right amount of dilution will happen to ensure that you don't dilute too soon. But waiting for too long and die is also not an option. So it's a very tricky uh, problem that will get solved in the real world only, I guess.
We have our next question from Ravu Agarwal from Macromancy. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Uh, so his question is, as a founder, how can I effectively manage cash flow while dealing with daily challenges in sales and manufacturing production?
I think a lot of the trade-offs that happen as an entrepreneur who's managing cash happen, and and perhaps that's how we looked at it at IdeaForge. And the the trade-off is very simple, right? Would you spend the last dollar that you have to do what will create better value for the business, or would you spend it on being more comfortable? So that's the trade-off that we are trying to balance here, right? And I'll give you an example, and it's a very funny example I've shared many times in the past, which is that we were down to our last $20,000 at one point in time that we had discretion to spend. And Mumbai in summers, bunch of humidity, very hot. We had a real need for a water cooler that can have a slightly larger capacity, and we could buy four more motors that would help us build the next, do the next experiment on technology. Now, that's the typical trade-off that I sense in that question. And, for us, I don't think that water cooler ever came. So I think it's a matter of choice that one has to make based on whether our focus is comfort or our focus is value. And that trade-off is always going to be hard. It's always going to pinch somebody either ways. So, but it's a trade-off one has to make in the right way.
We have another question from Ramesh ji, way to grow company name. So my favorite question is now, At what point should a startup consider an IPO in terms of revenue and profitability, and how does this process work as demonstrated by IdeaForge?
So I think when to do it is something that a lot of experts in the industry can suggest as to what's the right scale, what's the right profitability, and what's the right reason to raise that capital. But I can just reflect on our journey that we were at a place where we were profitable. We were in an industry segment which is expected to grow well, and we were also uh, we had relative maturity in the business, in that one sense that we had gone through a few rounds of funding. We had a bunch of relatively stable systems and processes. On top of that, we had been, as is usual for any funding round, we had been sort of gone through due diligences many times by then. So that matters a lot. And of course, in the end, there is a little bit of that maturity of the team that also is important when you look at being in the public market. So a bit of that, and then your own need, right? Why is one looking for an IPO, right? IPO is a great milestone for any entrepreneurial journey, but it wasn't necessarily the milestone that got us to picking or wanting to do an IPO. I think for us, we wanted to essentially understand how will we create value for IdeaForge, and where do we want to go, or where do we want to be at 2030. And if this is where we want to be at 2030, what will it take to get there? And if the answer is that we need capital in addition to these 20 steps, because the capital will fuel us doing those 20 steps, we need to get that capital on board. Now, within that question, what is the best vector of gaining capital given our background, history, market realities, vagaries of the market, etc.? So it's not a very linear decision, but once you are at a relatively okay stage, it's a choice of where you want to raise capital, if that is what you want to do. But if the objective is to give exit to existing investors who basically do not have the option of another strategic buyout or something like that, then IPO may be the only option to give them exit as an as an investment. So there are these nuances, but for us, fortunately, the objective was to genuinely raise more capital, and um, other things were more like incidental to the process than necessary to the process. And we felt that markets are a good place for presently for defense businesses, given that there were certain successes that the market has seen on the defense side as well as aerospace side. So we thought it's a great direction for us to take. Yeah, and the journey itself is a little daunting in the sense that once you decide you want to do it, uh, so a lot of us ignore the certificates we get, or whatever we get. But in the IPO journey, if you want to say that you have so and so certificate, you have to produce evidence. And we famously in the team used to joke around at the IPO time that short of proving that I'm alive, we've had to prove everything we say. So it's a very rigorous process. It's a very very tedious process, and you can end up creating a lot of martyrs in the team if you have not thought through well as far as that process is concerned. And it's very expensive process as well. So it's not like it's easy to get through. So preserve your certificates. If you use them in your pitch, that's the core of what that process entails.
Great. I think that's a great tip for all the new startups. Okay, our next question is coming from Abhishek Singh from Secured App. His question is, what would be an ideal exit strategy for investors that a startup should propose?
I think there is. I think the exit strategies are very obvious. Honestly, like it'll be one of these things, right? It'll be IPO, it'll be acquisition, it will be, maybe the promoters say that, okay, I have enough money, I can buy you back, or the company buybacks the shares. But I mean, there are standard ways in which it can only happen. And, as such, I am not too sure if there is really a lot of science behind it. What will really happen will entirely depend on the journey of that individual business.